I didn't remember names. I didn't remember places, and it didn't seem to bother me at that much. The way it really hit me was in a community in northeastern Colorado where we were at, and I was uh, one of the executives there at the hospital. The American Legion was bringing in the moving wall to that community, and the gentleman who was president of the Legion knew my background somewhat, and so he asked me to be the MC for the whole thing. And it's when it's very regimented and very structured on everything you have to do. So, after the moving wall was erected and in this huge park and so on and so forth, I'd go over and I'd stand and I'd look at that wall and I'd walk it from one end to the other, waiting for a name to jump out at me. And it never happened. One evening I was standing there in that park, and it's just dusk and the lights were starting to had just come on to illuminate the wall. And my chief surgeon walked up next to me, put his arms around my shoulder, and said, "How you doing?" Because he was a MASH surgeon in Vietnam. And so I said, Kurt, I said, it bugs the hell out of me. There's names there. And I don't, nothing jumps out at me. And he says, me too. And believe me, he saw a hell of a lot worse than I did. So, so anyhow, that's when it started to ruminate between my ears about that I couldn't remember. And there was one incident that really bothered me. And on one hand, I'm proud to say, but on another hand, it's whatever. I only lost one Marine in the field, and he was our platoon commander who had been with us less than a month, I'm going to say, and couldn't remember his name, couldn't remember the place, nothing. And that's what really kind of kicked things into motion. I always ran in what's known as the point element, because always my logic was, if we're going to get hit, the element front uh, element's going to get hit first. That's where I'm going to be needed. So I was always in that point element. And in this particular instance, back up the hill, the structure was that the commanding officer was always in the middle of the column. That way he could direct traffic any way he needed to. And Bates was back up there too. Um, and I heard, Corpsman up, Doc, Doc. So I ran up there and, and I found out I had the good Lord took care of me, because I had bullets buzzing past me like you would. Like. Anyhow, uh, McClurg was non-responsive. So of course my initial is I got to get an airway and get his heart going. So Bates was there and I said, "Do you know CPR?" And he said, "Yeah." And I says, "I want you to do chest compressions. I got to get an airway." So he started and we both did. And I wasn't getting no response to getting lung air into these lungs at all. And so I figured I just didn't have the airway open up for him. So I told Bates, no, I said, keep doing this. I said, I got to tilt his head up more to get that airway. Well, I had my hand further behind his head and I didn't like what I felt. And when I tilted his head up, the entry boom was right here. And it gone in here and come out the base of his skull. So, I mean, he was dead before I ever got to him. Uh, so Bates and I uh, put him into, we would use our ponchos to cover up the body, wrap him up, and of course by that time the ambush thing was all over with, and uh, we got a chopper in there to take his body out. I was notorious for throwing my steel pot away because I'm talking about helmet, because it was hot and I just didn't like it. So uh and every time I did, uh especially uh Lieutenant Garrett, he'd always order in another one. So, but one time I had an aha moment, and this vague thing I didn't remember is we'd been ambushed and been in a firefight, and it all got over with. And we were taking a break, and I took the pot off that I had on my head, started spinning it around. That was on my finger. That was what I'd do, and then I'd pitch it. And so anyhow, that's and when I was doing that, I felt that there's a liner inside those, and this rattling around inside that, between the liner and the steel pot. And I pulled the liner out, and there was a chunk of shrapnel. And that's when I had an aha moment and said, "You need to wear the damn thing."
When you think of Navy corpsmen working with Marines in
Mhm.
Vietnam,
Mhm.
what is going to come first to my mind is these guys that the Marines revere, that they love, that they speak about with such admiration. They saved so many lives there in Vietnam.
Mhm.
But when I talk to the corpsmen themselves, that's not how they think of themselves. Or no, I don't want to put it that way. Say what they feel more is the burden of what they were not able to do.
Oh,
Is that is
totally,
that, is that right?
totally. And so going back to that, piece is, I mean, my number one priority was boots on the ground. We could not lose personnel. All right. And so my role was to make sure that they stayed healthy enough. They ate, the garbage we had to eat, but at least it was nutrition, it was protein. Made sure that they took their anti-malarial uh, medication. Made sure that, I mean, every time we stopped, first thing I did is I walked around and I said, "Take your boots off," so I could check their feet for immersion foot issues. Making sure as best I could that they all had extra pairs of socks.
The medics and the corpsmen I've talked to say that in addition to being, the first line of medical aid
Mhm.
there in Vietnam for the troops out in the field, that the corpsmen, the medics also kind of became the confidants, the confessors, the counselors, the
Yeah,
priests, is the psychologist, all of
absolutely.
that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's during that period, um, and primarily from the southeastern part of the United States, and these were the ones that were in my unit,
Yeah.
was these young guys who back then, if they got into trouble with the law, the judge gave them one of two choices. You can go to jail or you can go to the Marine Corps. I was blown away at the number of them who could not read, could not write, none of that. And so they would get letters from home and I would read to them. And then I would sit down and help them write letters back home. So, that's that mother in me, I guess, or what have you. But just listening to them and talking, did we really get into the psychology of things? No, because hell, I didn't know that much about it by the psychology thing then by any means. Um, but it was there to have somebody to talk to them, and I worried more about them than I did myself, that's the way it should have been, and that's the way I was. I mean, when I crawl on the when I left my home when I from leave home before I on my way headed, I never thought I'd come home. I settled with myself that I'd come home in a box. But yeah, I was mom, dad, confidant, whatever the case may be. I mean, and if a couple of them got into it, I'd get in the middle of them so they wouldn't get in trouble with the lieutenant, uh, and tell them to knock it off. And the respect was there. They respected me, and they just, all right, doc, and turn around and walk away.
Let's go back. When did you go into the Navy?
On July 1st, 1968.
And why? What was the reason you went to the
What
Navy?
was it? Because I lost my student deferment and was 1A. So I went, all right, well, if I got to go, I want to go where I want to go and how I want. So that's why I enlisted in the Navy. I enlisted as a corpsman in the Navy.
Mm.
And back then, and I don't know if they still have it or not, but once you got through what was known as A school, you uh, could have the opportunity to go to B school, which is where you went to specialize, which was my goal, was to do that. And then, of course, the other was, again, if I got to go to Vietnam as a Navy corpsman, I'm going to be on the Sanctuary, a hospital ship off the coast.
Mm.
So as I was ending A school, I was talking to the company commander about my chances of going to B school. He says, no, he says, more than likely you're going to go to field medical school. And I said, what's field medical school? And he said, well, that's where we send you up to Camp Pendleton, training the Marine Corps. And I said, okay, next question. Why am I training with the Marine Corps? He said, son, let me explain it. So sure enough, went through field med school, uh, came back to the hospital in San Diego. Can't remember how long I was. Well, I wasn't there much longer before I got my orders for Vietnam. And
So, so when you went to Navy boot camp, and it sounds like even as you went through Corpsman A school, it it wasn't in your mind a possibility that you might end up with Marines in Vietnam.
none whatsoever.
You arrive in Da Nang on December 2nd, 69, and then
Right,
you go out to the Marines you're going to work with
right.
December 4th, 69,
Yeah,
and you meet them basically in a combat situation. You fly into a hot LZ.
right. The crew chief came and told us it was a hot LZ and they weren't going to set the chopper down on the ground. They opened up the tail. They went down so far, opened up I called it the tailgate, and you went diving off that tailgate, however far it was. And then I got up and I ran towards the perimeter where the Marines were and knocked Clyde on his butt.
Huh. How long did you have to prepare for that? Did you know this, right when immediately when you got on the helo? Did you say, "Hey, we're
No,
flying into a hot LZ"?
no, because that was unusual that they would even go into a hot LZ, but we were already out there. Because if it had been a hot LZ before we left the airfield in Da Nang, we wouldn't have left until it was all
So what did you have to prepare psychologically to the extent that's possible? 90 seconds, 2 minutes, 3 minutes?
over. Yeah, probably about probably a minute, 2 minutes. Yeah.
So I know it's not possible to really describe, you know, um, what happened when you heard that, but what words would you use when you hear, "Oh, we're going into a hot LZ"? You've only been in country 2 days.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, what words would you use to describe,
I
your
just
your mental set when you
once again it was, oh shit, here it is. This is
yeah,
and I mean this is it. And the point of it too is, when you were out in the bush, you thank God when you settled in for the night, and you thank God when you got up the next morning.
wow. How long was that LZ hot? Guessing.
Not long after we got out of there, I think it was probably on its way to cool down, really and truly at the time. But they'd got notification it was a hot LZ, it was a possible hot LZ, and that's how they treated it. It had to have been a quick ambush.
Yeah,
Small units, probably VC unit more than an NVA unit. The NVA were a little more, I'll say, disciplined than the Viet Cong were. So,
yeah. New guys often say that when they arrive, the guys who've been there for a while will sort of hold them at a distance.
they,
Um,
they what?
that they'll sort of keep the new guys at a distance for a while. The new guys will
Oh,
say,
the newbies? Absolutely, because, you know, yeah, absolutely, because when you're a newbie, you, boy, this is all, I may have been trained
right.
back in Pendleton, but this is all a new experience,
Well,
and, and
but I,
panic sets in and what have you. So,
but I wanted to ask though, is it the same experience for the corpsmen? Are the Marines more receptive to the new guy when he's a corpsman than
well,
the new guy who just shows
well,
up?
yeah, they are, because they know this is the guy, this is the guy that's going to keep me alive potentially, or take care of. Absolutely. And of course, whoever I followed was already out of there. How long they'd been gone, how long they'd been functioning without a corpsman, was it a day, was it 2 days, who knows? But yeah, we were always a welcome guest by all means.
Some corpsmen tell me that you know when an ambush, either
Mhm.
either the Marines are doing the ambush or the Marines are ambushed or when there's some sort of firefight. Some corpsmen say that at the beginning of it, they are combatants, so they're part of the fighting until the call goes up for corpsman up. Others say, no, we weren't combatants at all. We're just there waiting to respond. In your case, which was it?
Well, you were an extra gun by all means. Okay. And when I went to the field, I carried a 45 and I carried an M16 with, ammo, along with all my medical gear, along with my personal gear. On average, you know, uh, we humped 100 plus pounds. And so I carried that 16 for a while, never freaking fired around out. And I went, you know what? This doesn't make sense. This impedes me, and what have you, to do the job that I'm really here for. And therefore, um, if I need a 16, there's always one right next to me. You know what I mean? And so I uh, sent it back to the rear. and I never carried one. Was I criticized by some of the Marines? In fact, I think Jersey was probably one of them.
Mm.
Why in the hell I wasn't carrying a 16? I said, you don't want me worrying about a damn 16 or taking care of your ass if you get shot. And I'm sure that's what I said. I'm just guessing off the top of my head. But and again, I there was always one right next to me.
I wouldn't expect that you would have a specific number of days, but how long do you think it was estimating before your, what you had been trained to do as a corpsman before it was required in a combat situation?
Okay, well, I can tell you my first requirement. It was in a con. I not in the actual engagement, but so when as I recall that evening, because it was dusk when they dropped me off. We set into the perimeter for the night. Got up the next morning to go join the rest of the company. So we did. We got there, and it was I'm going to say mid to late afternoon, something like that. And the company commander, Captain McCarthy, come up to me and he says, "I need you to help me keep a wounded NVA alive till tomorrow morning." And I went, "Yes, sir." So anyhow, had a little cover set up with our ponchos. They did. It was already done, and I uh, went in there, and yeah, if that young man was 15, he was lucky. And he'd been wounded in the right leg severely with bleeding. So somebody had taken some care of him, and why McCarthy picked me to spend the night, I don't know. Probably because the other corpsmen were tired from what they'd been doing. So Frank and I stayed up with that kid all night long, kept him alive. Uh, he was in severe pain. So, we carried syrettes of morphine. And so, I had plenty of them. So I gave him a couple of doses of morphine to help him a little bit, kept the bleeding controlled and what have you. And so the next morning, um, Chopper came in to pick him up. So carried me, and anyhow, we carried him to the chopper, loaded him on the chopper, and the chopper took off. And so I stood there watching the chopper going up, going up, going up, going up. And then all of a sudden, here comes a body out the back end of the chopper. They just threw it out. And I went, I am really in the shit now.
On the helo, do you know, were they Americans or were they Arvin forces?
No, no, no. It was all Americans. Mhm. Yeah.
So you call this NBA guy a kid, and you say if he was 15, he was lucky. In other words, very young.
Yep.
You're with him for the night. As that time passes and you see that he's in pain, I mean, what was your own disposition toward him? I
I
mean,
had no animosity.
obviously the
I
enemy,
had,
or
I had no animosity. He was once again, my first experience.
yeah.
And I was there to take care of, and I was afforded the luxury of being well trained on how to medically take care of people. And I went over there with an open mind. I said, I don't care who in the hell needs help. I'm going to do it. All right.
Mm.
That did change. I will tell you that. But in that instance, Number one, the captain asked me. Number two, that kid needed care, and I gave him the best care I could have given him. When the Marines found out that I gave him two syrettes and morphine, they got madder than hell at me. What are you going to do? We need some of that. I went, number one, there's plenty more where the hell that came from. And I will stay fully supplied. So
When you
those were angry at me for doing it.
when you saw that body come out of the helo, whether it was living or dead,
Yeah.
um,
Well, he was alive when I put him on the chopper. I would assume they decided he was so young that he didn't know shit about that, because McCarthy's goal wanted to get him back to the rear to be interrogated. And had they even gotten him back there, I don't think he would have lived through a hardcore interrogation by any cotton picking means. So as far as I was concerned, they threw a live body off the back end of that truck.
and how old were you at this time?
I was for Vietnam, I was old. I went in country at 20.
Wow. So you're 20 years old, you spend all night working on this kid, you see this kid thrown off a helicopter. What message did that send to you about what was going on in
This
Vietnam?
is this is really war. It's them and us. I mean, that was the message I got. It's really
And you said that, your disposition when you go to Vietnam is I'm going to help anybody, you know, but you said that that did change over time.
it changed when I lost Lieutenant McClure. When I lost Lieutenant McClure, I became cold-hearted as hell. So, however, I will tell you this. Uh, um, we did med caps for whenever we'd go back to one of the fire support bases or LZs, they used that term synonymously. Of course, I went to the battalion aid station to just help out because that's where my home was based. And so Captain, one of the primary one was a doctor by the name of Captain McCarthy, or not, wasn't Captain McCarthy, that was Frank. Anyhow, he and I would go out to a local village every time I came in, and we'd do med caps. Med caps is where we would go out, and of course the mother would bring children to us, and adults, aging adults, and what have you. And I mean, I really uh, got a sense of, feeling good about helping these little kids and these older people. Most you didn't see, I talked about this kid was probably 15. So what the VC would do, or what the NVA would do, is go into the village. And if there were any males in the area of, uh, between 10 and on up, they had to join the NVA mandate.
Mm.
And the way that was done was they would tell the the youth, if you don't join us, we're going to kill your mother and father and your siblings. And use the same psychology on the parents. If you don't let them go with us and encourage them to go with us, we're going to kill him. Right. So that's how they functioned over there. And so uh and again, so in these villages, there's just be these little kids, I mean, anywhere from newborns on up to, 4, 5, 6 years old, thereabouts, and what have you. And then another piece that I was very sensitive about or did was, okay, the villagers all knew that there was a medical person with each unit. And so if somebody got hurt, they would come to the perimeter and ultimately uh, us corpsmen, and I'll talk about me, and I would see them. The majority of them were old ladies who had to work the rice fields because the men were gone. Okay. So they had to go out and work the rice fields. And with all the stuff that we dumped in the ground over there, and I'm talking armament, they would out there with their hoe and they'd strike one and it'd explode. And uh, I never saw, and I never have since, more eviscerated bowels in my life than I did there. So they'd bring them in, they'd have, big uh, opening in their abdomen and the bowel protruding. And all I could do was clean it up. And then what I would do is generally they would have a rice bowl over the top of it, is try to explain to them as best I could. You got to keep it moist and what have you. There was part of me that says, I wish to hell I had suture out here because I just clean it, shove it back into the abdominal cavity, suture it up as best I could. And no, because we couldn't medevac, they nobody could not get it. And I understand.
So these med caps, so you've got little kids coming and older people coming. They've got various medical ailments, and you're helping them.
Patches, cuts,
Yeah.
scrapes,
Right.
uh, earaches, whatever the case. Of course, dental over there was non-existent, so they'd have dental pain. That was more with the older women, but
Yeah. So you're helping to the extent you can. And I want to ask about what you said a minute ago about after Lieutenant McClurg was killed, how you became very cold. I want to ask you about that, but um, did these med caps and helping the civilians, and I know, it's a little rough to know who's really a civilian and who's not in Vietnam, although I think 4-year-old kids we can safely
yeah.
put them in that category and you're helping them. As you look back on your time in Vietnam, is that something that helped you from completely falling into the abyss of just absolute callousness that that constant combat can drop a person into? Do you think that I don't mean when I ask you, did that help you to preserve your humanity that other Marines completely lost their humanity? That's not what I'm saying.
I
But
understand.
did that med cap, do you think that that helped you hold on to something that you might have lost otherwise without it?
Oh,
If
I think so. And again, I'll go back to my rearing and what have you. I've always been a caring individual, and with little kids, you can't take it out on little kids. For old ladies, you can't take it out on old ladies. They're a freaking victim, just like in essence, all of us were victims of the whole damn mess. Montagnards were a group of Vietnamese who lived up in the mountains, and they escaped to the mountains to escape all the crap, and were generally kind towards us, peaceful, but you never turn your back on anybody. Even, I mean, and believe me, even 5-year-old kids, 5-year-old kids who walk up behind you and drop a fragmentation grenade and run like hell. You just have to watch your back.
when you said a few minutes ago that after Lieutenant McClurg was killed that you became, very cold, which, I've heard that a lot before and it makes sense. Not that I understand because I haven't experienced it, but it makes sense that you would say that. Um, but what do you mean by that? Or how did that
Once
affect you?
again,
What difference did it make in the field?
well, put yourself in the place in your with your family, and somebody hurts or kills your family. the normal psychological response to that is extreme anger and hate. And that's what, you know, somebody killed, they killed one of my Marines.
After Lieutenant McClurg's death and this understandable change in you, did you have to work on any other wounded NVA
Mm,
or
I
Vietnam?
I don't remember any, no,
Okay. Yeah.
because I probably wouldn't have touched it. I mean, I saw plenty of dead ones by all means. Did I go over and check to make sure they were dead? No. If that had been a Marine, I'd went over and checked to make sure that they were gone or no, I can help them. But
Yeah.
again, that's the enemy. That's the enemy. That's the enemy. We would be out anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 weeks to 8 weeks out in the jungle. And of course, getting resupplied was always a challenge. There is days that we went without food, days that we went without decent, well, there was no decent water in the jungle. I mean, we pulled, uh, of course, not because of Agent Orange and the defoliant, they just dropped that crap everywhere. And, I had some indication that it wasn't good by all means because it's killing vegetation. But there was no education to any of us out there about that. Just what the hell you knew. And I mean, we'd refill our canteens out of rainwater from bomb craters when there was a stream around or a small pond of water and what have you. And those were few and the ponds were few and far between because of and the streams. Because, if we could, we'd take advantage of that, basically take a bath and put our grungy ass clothes back on. Uh, but one particular instance that I remember is we came on this pond. We hadn't had, everybody was filling up their canteens because they're, short on water, and everybody was, stripping down and taking a bath. And all of a sudden, I looked around, all the vegetation was dead. And I immediately told them, I said, "You dump all the water out of those canteens, and you get your butt out of that pond." I was smart enough to had enough knowledge to do that, just for the fact that, oh, if it's killing vegetation, it's gonna. And sure enough, years later, what do we find out? And it's still killing us today.
So you
And
had, it's one thing, you look back on that and think, yeah, if this stuff is killing all the vegetation, and I don't know if this happened with you, but sometimes vets talk about, they're going through the jungle or they're sitting and the planes are going over and then they've got this mist coming down on them and there's,
it was a brown dust, is what it was. It was a brown dust.
yeah, and it's just one of those things you look back and think, I mean, if it's killing all the vegetation, how is it possible that it's not having any impact at all on the people?
You never gave it that
But
thought.
but
That
you
needs
but you had a gut feeling though that this is,
Well, yeah, I did. I did. I mean, and I wasn't the only by any damn means.
if I could give you a potion and the potion allows you to keep all of the good memories that you have. Um, but all of the bad memories you have from Vietnam are wiped away. You don't think of them again. And so the thought exercise is if you had that opportunity to keep all of the good memories, but to lose the bad ones, would you take that opportunity?
Boy, that's a tough question to answer because, what did I learn from those bad opportunities? I mean, everything that happens to us every day have you. You learn something. Hopefully you learn something. And I try to learn something from everything. And, I think back to, you know, the trauma and treating is, how did that, look at how that prepared me to manage and take care of trauma in my clinical. And whereas I think it made me a better clinician. And, and again, the many good surgeons that I worked with who knew my ambitions and knew what the hell I did and knew I was right in the middle of it with them. You know? So anyhow, I mean, it's
Sure.
there for years as a hospital executive. If I walked by the emergency room and something major was going on in the ER, I wanted to go in there and go to work.
When I hear Marines talk about corpsmen, they always talk about these guys that they almost revere. They respect. You mentioned the Marines criticizing you for, giving the syringes of morphine and all that, but decades later, Marines they're not
They
gonna
don't, they
nurse
don't
that
remember
approach.
that.
So the Marines hold the corpsmen in high regard. So, what I'm gonna ask you to do now, which I know will be easy for you, is to bring to your mind's eye, you're somewhere in I Corps there, southwest of Da Nang, I think, 1960, 1969, going into 1970. Um, Things are quiet. You can see the Marines around you, right? At least some of them that you're with. Um, Tell me about those Marines. What do the American people need to know about those Marines you served with in Vietnam?
They are the most disciplined, most committed group of individuals I have ever, and including my, civilian life that I've ever worked with. They're committed, they're dedicated. Esprit de corps to this day runs through their veins. And I am phenomenally proud that I got the opportunity to serve with them uh, and, and take care of them. I mean, it wasn't what I wanted, um, and and what have you. But uh, you know, I'm proud of what I was doing, what I did, and they make me proud to be. And let me tell you what, when an older Marine finds out that I was a corpsman, they, they don't know me from Adam, but goddamn doc, we respected you. They didn't know me, but we respected you. We appreciated you, and we thank you for everything you did for us. You know, that makes life worth it.